thing that we are all alive in this month doing this together.
Thank you so much.
Straight up, I would want to reintroduce the topic now that you are on. We are talking on local governments' need for independence from state interference. This is our grassroots program where we concern politically that concerns the grassroots. And in earnest, I would want to get your overview introduction on what local government is.
Nigeria constitutionally practices tiers of government. You have federal government, you have the state government, you have 36 of them, and for this specific state, Anambra, we have our headquarters in Oka, Anambra State. And then within Anambra, we have 21 local government areas. So, by the 3 tiers of government, we have the federal, we have the state, and we have the local government. And by function, the local government is the closest to the people. And by administrative duty also, it is also the closest to the people. And then they have their constitution, their duties spelled out to them, including economic management, setting out of economic planning, liaising with local administrative authorities, cultural authorities, doing things like revenue generation and the management of signage and all of those things, as apportioned to them in the of the 1999 Constitution as amended. Also, they have other functions, and I was clearly spelled out in the Section 7 of Nigeria's Constitution. So, for your question and for the general audience, local government means that arm of the elected government or democratically elected government that is closest to the people. And that is what we call local government.
Thank you. That was quite an impressive justice you did to that. But then people has clamored over time for the independence of the local governments. You just talked about what the local government is. Now, would we say, in looking at the democratic structure and in practice, that our local governments has been very independent of interference, whether from the state, whether from generally external bodies? What's your take on that?
Local governments have struggled, and part of the struggle is to gain autonomy. And we have had several local government reforms or proposed reforms that seeks to strengthen the autonomy of the local government. Before I talk about reforms, let me talk about the over reliance on the state governments, because we have lacuna to the 1999 Constitution. Lacuna and the 1999 Constitution as amended that have allowed state governments to technically acquire local governments as an official extension of the state governments. That is why you see that governors unilaterally and in cohorts with the State House of Assembly determine who becomes what when it comes to local government council administration. In Anambra State, we've had long history with this, that for instance, in the Chief administration, there was just one conduct of local government elections, and that was towards the end of his administration. And when Obiano came in, he did not even conduct one local government elections, right? All he had to do was to appoint cronies and associates, and sometimes overly members of his political party, to man the affairs of chair the affairs of the local government councils, both in appointing legislators, and in this case we call them councillors, and then in also appointing local government council chairpersons. And he does this with the enablement of the State House of Assembly, of course. But what we see is that because the governor appoints who he wishes to as the local government council chairperson, and he also populates the local government councillorship board with people he wishes to, then you cannot say that they are independent, because they are always accountable to who brought them into office. If these people are elected democratically, then they are with their mandate, with their tenure, or give them a pass mark or not for the job they've done. But when you have appointments from the state government, then you could have systems where you begin to see that they are more accountable or more loyal to the governor who appointed them instead of the people who they were appointed to serve. So technically, local governments have not enjoyed, to my mind, the autonomy that is due to them. And this is because of the lacuna in the Constitution. And then this brings me up to the stage of discussing, what do you then call it? the amendments or the interventions. As the latest one is from Muhammad Buhari, who signed an executive order in May 2020, insisting on local government autonomy, especially financial autonomy for local governments.
Absolutely.
But again, that order has fallen short of the mark, because the executive order, while it is well intentioned, is not the most appropriate tool for ensuring local government autonomy. Because the president insisted on signing an executive order, but an executive order from the president is inferior to the Constitution of the Federal Republic. And then this Constitution of the Federal Republic is the one that has seemingly sold local governments in bondage or in perpetual slavery to state government. So if you want to take away that slavery, if you want to take that yoke of state government upon the neck of local government administrative councils, then you have to resort back to the constitutions. And over time, there has been amendment attempts on the constitution. So where you have members of the National Assembly, put arms of the National Assembly, legislature and the Senate trying to tweak modalities on acquiring or giving local governments the implement of the act independent. Over time, we've seen that such proposals, amendment proposals, have failed. And where they scale through the National Assembly, remember that for such a law to be permanent, that it has to go through the concurrence of these various state houses of assembly. In this case, they have to get 2/3 of all the state houses of assembly in Nigeria to vote for local government administrative autonomy. So people have looked at this thing, and I think that that's one of the things we already looked at. And you saw that you have to put in a lot of hard work to convince the National Assembly to pass that law granting local government autonomy, not just passing any law, but amending the constitution to empower local governments to act independently. But beyond that, you also have to get it down to the various state houses of assembly to concur. So, because if you don't get 2/3 to vote on it, then and then we do know that these local government, these state houses of assembly have undue influence of the governor. So over time, we have seen that the chief contributor to the seeming slave trade of local governments, as against vis-a-vis their relationship with state governments, is the elected state governors and elected members of the state house of assembly.
Wow, okay, that's very good, Mr. Chima. But then, while you were giving analysis on that, you mentioned the bill, the executive order, and the constitution. How do you juxtapose? How do you juxtapose the efficacy of that order and the constitution in respect to how much the local government have not fared or have fared in respect to independence and in favor of the democratic experience and dividend accrued to the grassroots?
One, you see, it is the responsibility of state governments to conduct local government elections.
Absolutely.
That is why you see staggered local government elections everywhere in the country, right? And then in this time, it is almost always the exclusive preserve of the state governor to, out of his magnanimity, decide to conduct local government elections.
Oh.
For instance, we've seen it in Anambra State that of the 3 governors we've had, only one conducted local government elections, and that was towards the end of his administration, and heavens did not fall. Imagine a scenario where President Buhari wakes up one morning and says that he's not going to conduct state elections into the offices of the state governors, that he's going to give from Abuja, appoint who will be the governor of Anambra State, appoint who will be the governor of Imo State, and appoint who will be the governor of 36 states of the Federation. Imagine, because he cannot get that powers from anywhere. But we have a constitution that empowers the governors technically to appoint caretaker committee, or what they call transition committee, in perpetuity. And now the constitution says that this transition committee, their tenure cannot elapse more than 3 months. It is just for 3 months. And what the state governors do is that every 3 months you submit the same person, the same name. Like if I've made you prime, the local government a chairperson of, say, Atlanta local government, and then after 3 months where your tenure has expired, I will resubmit your name, and then the state house of assembly will confirm you. So I can keep submitting your name till I run out of 8 years of tenure as a governor. So this means that the governor can decide at will not to conduct elections, and he will not be in breach of any law. The governor can also decide to conduct elections, and it will be out of his magnanimity or benevolence. Then if you have a law that empowers them to do that, you cannot take away those powers by signing an executive order. You must have to recourse to the constitution I agree that amending Nigeria's constitution is difficult, but people who intend to grant local government autonomy, grant autonomies to local governments must begin by first sending reputable men and women to the National Assembly, because that's where it starts. It is only when we send our best to the National Assembly that will ask them to grant local government autonomy by passing or by amending Nigeria's constitution. And when we've done that, we will not stop there. We also send men and women of character to the state houses of assembly, because what we do know is that the governor cannot act alone. That oftentimes the governor, the large local government funds, that he does this with the assistance or the connivance of the various state houses of assembly, because it is the state house of assembly that will keep devolving into electoral committees, as they call themselves, by electing every 3 months the nominees of the state governments or the nominees of the state governor into becoming councillors and into becoming local government council chairperson. Yeah. And so if you don't have men and women of honor who populate the state house of assembly, then anytime the governor sends them names, with or without question, they approve those names. So if people want to get local government autonomy, we are interested in who becomes the president of Nigeria, yes. But we should also be interested in the quality of men and women we send to the National Assembly. We should also be interested in the quality of men and women we send to the State House of Assembly. Because these people determine how our laws change and whether or not the governors can get away with the continued pillaging of local government administrative authority. Let me track back a bit to comment on specifics. Because, for instance, if you make a law, for instance, and we send men and women into the National Assembly, and they make a law that guarantees autonomy for the local government, and then they get the president to assent to that law, it doesn't become a law until you get, there are 36 states in Nigeria. 24 out of those 36 states must concur for that law to be in effect. If you get 23 to pass local government autonomy and the other people reject it, then you fall short of the mark. That means local government will not be autonomous. And then you remember that in the last dispensation, that was supposed to grant financial autonomy to the various state houses of assembly. And then even state house of assembly members voted against their own financial autonomy. To tell you the kind of men and women we send to the state house of assembly. Because oftentimes we complain about the president, we complain about Buhari, we complain about our governors, but we don't see that these people are enabled by state house of assembly. So that's why I begin to advocate that people who want to see genuine changes in state house of assembly, I believe it will not happen overnight, but we'll have to begin by painstakingly choosing the kind of men and women we elect into the various state houses of assembly. And that's why if we elect credible people, then we could begin to see perhaps substantial amendments to Nigeria's constitution that will grant autonomy to local government.
Evidently. Mr. Chairman, I would want to greatly applaud you, because of the broad spectrum of your responses to this topic. You've arrested my consciousness to stay with you on the indices you are profiling while you react to these things. You talked about the financial autonomy and all of that. Maybe I'll just read up something for you. There has been several rowers to get the approval of the federal government for the autonomy of local governments, with emphasis on the finance. In view of this fight to gain the independence of the local governments, the federal government of Nigeria won a suit against the 36 state governors seeking the disapproval of the financial autonomy of the local governments. This judgment was given by Justice Eko months after the National Assembly passed a bill seeking to grant financial autonomy to local governments across the country. Now, looking at this judgment, we see that emphasis was given more on financial autonomy. And I want to ask, is it basically just the finances of the local governments that needs autonomy, or is there a wholesome demand that the local governments become independent from the states in order to help them function in administratively, that the people at the grassroots benefit largely?
What we've seen is that there is an enlightened demand for devolution of powers to the local government councils. We've seen this from the president, especially President Muhammad Buhari. Not that other presidents did not try, but Buhari tried to grant local government autonomy, especially financial autonomy. Then you also saw it from previous administrations. But the issue is that the tool, the vehicle, for instance, Assume that, let me use for the sake of this analysis, assume that granting autonomy to local government councils is a trip to Abuja. And you can decide to trek to Abuja. You can decide to board a bike to Abuja. You can decide to board a keke to Abuja. You can decide to do a bus, go to school to Abuja. You can decide to fly to Abuja.
Or do a bicycle.
And then, yeah, so all these things are possible. So the tool which the federal government has tried to grant autonomy to the local government is always inferior to the constitution. A court judgment is valid, but it is inferior to the constitution. Executive order is valid, but it's inferior to the constitution. Signing a law or passing a bill and enacting it to be a law is good, but it's inferior to the constitution. If you don't address the elephant in the room, which is the constitution, why don't we, for instance, put conduct of local government elections on a first-line charge? Why don't we, for instance, take away the powers from the state government? Why don't we, for instance, mandate INEC to conduct local government elections the same way they conduct presidential elections, the same way they conduct National Assembly elections, the same way they conduct governorship elections, the same way they conduct State House of Assembly elections? Why don't we put it back to them to conduct local government elections so that at each election year, we are voting? If the people can vote who becomes the president, can vote who they send to the Senate, can vote who they send to the Federal House of Representatives, can vote who they send to the House of Reps, why can't they vote who they send to become their local government representatives? So you take away their powers from the state and plow it back to the federal government and plow it back to INEC so that the elections are held simultaneously. If not on the same day, maybe the presidential elections and local government elections held on the same day, and National Assembly elections held on the same day. Governorship elections and State House of Assemblies held on the same day. And then maybe 1 week after, local government elections and councillorship elections held the same day. That way you can guarantee uniformity in voting so that you don't have Governor A deciding whether he wants to do it or not. So, and then that comes to political independence from the state governments. Then after you've talked about political autonomy, then you now talk about financial autonomy. There is also a law in Nigeria that allows state governors to run what they call Joint Allocations and Accounts Committee.
Absolutely.
Jack is responsible for managing local government funds and state government funds. The way your audience will understand it is, if I am an adult and I have graduated from the university and I'm now working with, say, any bank in Nigeria, and then there is a law that allows my father to co-own my salary account with me, that if I go to work, I work for 25 days in a month, and then at the end of the month, instead of paying me directly, the money is paid into an account that I manage with my father. Then how am I autonomous to decide what I can do with my money? Because I can want to buy a shoe, and my father says no, I must buy, I might decide to eat out in the restaurants, and my father says no, you must eat at home. I can decide to buy a footwear, and my father says no, that's not a priority, you must keep the money. So if I have earned the right to work, then I should have the autonomy to decide what I do with my money. In the case of local government and state government, local governments earn allowances or allocations from the federal government or from the Federal Allocation Committee. But where you put in that money in an account that they mandate with the state government, then the office of the chairman or the office of the commissioner for local government affairs always sits in responsibility over that money. And then they appoint, for instance, 3 weeks ago, you had Governor Soludo, those of us in Anambra State had Governor Soludo appointing members of the Jack Committee in Anambra State, appointing a representative from the local government, representative of the state government, but ultimately the money, the people populating the list are representatives appointed by the state governor. You had this SSG, you had the local government commissioner sitting in. So what happens is that when the resources for the 21 LGAs in Anambra State are brought to Anambra, the governor, through his appointees, determine how best to spend that money. So if that same father that I've mentioned to you, which is in this case Governor Soludo, is to determine the kind of way the resources of local government is to be spent, then no matter how well-intentioned he is, and I believe that he's well-intentioned, he will not run it as efficiently as it will be where local governments are allowed the independence to use their money as they deem fit, right? So the instruments with which the federal government and the members of the National Assembly has approached the issue of financial autonomy or political autonomy to local governments always fall the mark, because they keep shying away from addressing it fundamentally by taking away constitutional powers from the government and granting it directly to local governments by disbanding this joint allocation and account committee, and then by also disbanding the whole essence that is called Office of the Honorable Commissioner for Local Government Affairs. What is that, for Christ's sake? How do you have an Office of the Local Government Commissioner for Local Government Affairs, which is that all local government chairpersons are subjected under a commissioner who is appointed by the law, which means that all the are under the political and administrative control of the commissioner, who is an appointee of the state government. So you begin to find a whole lot of legal, and because these governors do not operate out of the law, they are operating well within the law. So there is a law that empowers them to abuse local governments. Until that law is addressed, then I envisage that this abuse of local government by state government will continue.
Thank you very well. Thank you very well, Mr. Chima. And if you're just joining us, you are on to Omega 101.7 FM, my radio, your radio, and this is Grassroots Governance, where we extract and examine, where we identify and profile solutions to every socio-political problem that has hitherto found ways. I wouldn't want to say prevalent, though, in our political system and political corridors. We are looking at local governments, the need for independence from the states. How has the local government fared thus far in Nigeria? How has the local government been independent enough? How has the grassroots, people in the rural areas particularly, benefited from the local government structure? Has there been need for a revisit to the structure and the administration of the local governments? This is what we are explaining on this topic today. And with me on the other side as my guest has been Mr. Chima Christian, a very loud voice, a social commentator and a political analyst, and I like calling him a one-time this and that. He's a man who has held too many portfolios in the political corridors and beyond. Mr. Chima, it's been a pleasure doing this with you. But then before we let the callers to inject their thoughts in this, I would want to bring your knowledge to some information here. Earlier this year, February this year, the Nigerian Labour Congress held a protest at the National Assembly seeking for the absolute autonomy of the local government, even the judiciary. Hello?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm here with you.
According to a report, the leadership of the Nigerian Labour Congress, alongside the Nigerian Union of Local Government Employees and Parliamentary Staff Association of Nigeria, on Monday led a protest to the National Assembly. They were calling for the overwhelming vote from the federal lawmakers ahead of the by-clause voting in the ongoing constitutional amendment. Then, they demanded that the lawmakers vote in favor of the autonomy of the local governments and the judiciary. And I want to ask you, you've highlighted this thing before. With a more concentrated focus on the lawmakers from the federal house to the Senate to the state house, how have they been part of the reasons why the local government has not fared enough or has fared very well? How have they been part of the political reforms or whatever you may want to call it, to see that the local governments enjoy a level of independence appreciably to favor the administration and favor people at the grassroots?
Let me bring this home to make your audience understand. For instance, I asked the question, how does the local government affect people?
Absolutely.
How does the local government administration affect people? Because oftentimes when we talk about governance, we solely focus on who becomes the president. When we talk about governance, we solely focus on who the governor is. But we don't always talk about the failure and the local government system. But this fixation on Abuja or fixation on the state government capitals is erroneous to my mind. Let's take the issue of infrastructure, for instance. That out of about 200,000 kilometers of road in Nigeria, 64% of them belong to the local governments. The federal government and the state government manage only 36% of roads in Nigeria.
Interesting.
So if anywhere you see bad roads, anywhere you see dysfunctional roads in Nigeria, in almost all the instances, 64% of it is because the local government is not functioning, because those are local government roads. And only 36 jointly belong to either the state or the federal government, right? Now, how do I make this closer to you? That for all the people living in Aguata today who are listening to this program, how many percent of the people who are listening to us use federal roads on a daily basis? What is the percentage of those who live in Aguata today who have business to do in Abuja or in any state that will require them to use federal roads? What is the percentage? What is the percentage of people who do business in Aguata today that will require them to do interstate travel? And I don't say that they don't do interstate travel. They do interstate travel on state roads and on federal roads. But most of the time, the interaction of the local populace, whether it be going to school for school kids, whether it be going to the market for market women, whether it be going to the farm for farmers, it mainly revolves around roads that are supposed to be managed by local governments. Because 2 out of about, when you have 10 people using the roads, about 8 of them will remain for any given month doing business, interacting with, or doing business within their local community. Only about 2 out of 10 will step out of their local community to maybe get to the state capital, or to maybe get to another local government, or perhaps to get to another state entirely, relying on federal or state roads. That in the case of everyday Nigerians, most of the roads we interact with on a daily basis are roads that are supposed to be under the purview of local government councils. And because these local government councils don't have the autonomy to generate and spend their own resources, you see that 64% of these roads fail. And so when we talk about the bad roads in Anambra, for instance, the whole focus is on the governor of Anambra State. We don't talk about the local government system, because although you see sometimes that you see state intervention on local government roads, but local governments are supposed to do their own roads. Definitely. Now, this is just infrastructure. Talking about health, the same thing. Talking about education, the same thing, right? That most of the times, the healthcare system, primary healthcare system, are supposed to fall under the purview of local government authority. But now you have someone in Abuja centrally, or someone in Oka running the primary healthcare centers in Umuchi, for instance. Now, as well-intentioned as someone in Oka running the local government or the primary healthcare center in Umuchi, he might be well-intentioned, but he will not run it better than someone who is sitting in Aguata, which is a stone throw from Aguata local government council, which is a stone throw from Umuchi, or from any of the neighboring communities in that local government area. The same thing with school feeding program. Let me talk about school feeding program. You might have seen videos going around the internet of kids who are almost fed by whatever they call the school feeding program of the federal government. Between the federal government, and this is my argument, that the federal government should have no business with feeding school children, primary school children. That the state government should also have no business feeding school children. How can somebody in Abuja be cooking for somebody in Umuchu and they expect the food to take nice?
Yeah.
But it is parents who are supposed to take care of their kids. But wherein the government wants to intervene, we have seen that the best government to do that intervention is always the government closer to the people, in this case, local government authority. Absolutely. So where you have a dysfunctional local government authority, whether you find it in education, whether you find it in health, whether you find it in infrastructure, that governance break down. Because those that are supposed to supply it at the local level are nowhere to be found, because there are operational laws that have technically foreclosed them from functioning optimally. Then you ask me about whose responsibility is it? I mean, it should be the responsibility of lawmakers and the people they are making laws on behalf. For instance, when a senator comes back to the village, and they almost come back every weekend, when a state lawmaker comes back to the village, what are we asking them to do for us? We're asking them to build bridges. We're asking them to fix culverts. We're asking them to pay for our private schools, our kids' school fees. We're asking them to pay for our medical bills. Nobody asks them for laws. But the primary function of a lawmaker is to make laws.
Definitely. Definitely.
Some of the issues we are going to our senators to solve can be solved by the local government chairman.
Absolutely.
But because they don't make laws that empower the local government chairman, then we always have to run to their houses. I see federal lawmakers doing intervention on roads, on local government roads. I see federal lawmakers doing intervention on state healthcare system. And these are good and well-intentioned, but they are better managed by local administrative authority. But because the lawmakers have not done their duty, which part of them is to grant autonomy to local governments, then you can begin to see that they leave what they are set to and they start doing covers, they start patching our roads. Patching our roads is an ancillary benefit, not the primary duty of a lawmaker. So going forward into this election, and I am happy that Nigerians will have another opportunity in 2023. But unfortunately, all the conversations I've seen about 2023 elections are pointed at who becomes the president. And it is good that we elect a good president, but there's only so little a good president can do if we don't support him with good lawmakers.
Of course.
If we don't support him with good state lawmakers who will grant and make laws, because some of the problems with Nigeria are fundamental and they are constitutional. Whether you are talking about devolution of powers, whether you are talking about restructuring, whether you are talking about anything, some of the issues affecting Nigeria are structural and constitutional in nature. Those, I agree that you have to elect a good president, but electing a good president alone and sending thugs and near empty-headed people to the National Assembly and the State House of Assembly will not do us any good. That's why, as much as we're interested in electing credible person to become our president, we should also look at the people who are going to go to the State House of Assembly to ask critical questions, to make sure that they understand the primary duty of a lawmaker. And when we've elected them, we should sit on their case, not electing them and then asking them to fix boreholes. Electing them and insisting that they change those laws that have held Nigeria back.
Okay, that's a good one, Mr. Chambers. We advise to allowing the calls to the listeners to make injections and contributions in this conversation. I did like to ask a question further, consequent on your responses. Now, you talked about people at the grassroots level. Now, how has the grassroots suffered extensively? I know you've touched it a bit. How have they suffered extensively, and what is expected of them in correcting this menace, so to speak? Because you talked about when the lawmakers come home, what do the people report to them? What do the people demand of them? What do the people ask them? What do the people complain to them of being their paramount need and wants? Now, what should the grassroots do? And thus far, looking at your disagreement with what the how do I put this now? Okay, that the local government has not been independent enough. How has the people suffered at the grassroots levels, and what is expected of them to cause a positive change in respect to this?
I have talked about infrastructure. I use the instance that out of Nigeria's 200,000 kilometers of roads network, that 64% of that belongs to the local governments. And when we go to our federal lawmakers or our state lawmakers, oftentimes we ask them for help. Please give me money to pay my son's medical bill. You don't ask the question, why is the primary healthcare center not working? If the primary healthcare center is working, then some of the ailments do not require you to go to teaching hospital or to private hospitals because they can be managed at the primary care level. It is only a slight percentage of the healthcare needs of Nigeria that you have to extrapolate to the state level or to the federal level or to the tertiary level. That most of the times, malaria, headache, fever, all of those things, diarrhea, and even childbirth, antenatal or postnatal, giving birth to children, that some of these things are things that could be managed at the primary healthcare level efficiently if the primary healthcare system is working. You ask yourself, why is the primary healthcare system not working? And that is even why I like the program that you're doing, because the role of the media is to enlighten the audience. Because sometimes the members of the public don't ask the right questions because they don't know. And that's the essence of the media, in educating, in informing, and enlightening the audience. And I hope that your audience who are listening to us this morning will walk away from this program with a broadened worldview to look at the issue. That you are going to the lawmaker to ask for your son's medical bill. It is good. But there were laws that made sure that the primary healthcare centers are not working. There were laws that did not get it right at that level. When you're going to his house to ask him to come and fix your culverts, to ask him to come and patch the roads, to ask him that the roofs of the primary school, that water has taken it away. There are laws in Nigeria that have technically sidelined the area of government or the arm of government, not the arm of government, the tier of government that is supposed to take care of those responsibilities. So therefore, people tend to see governance as tangible deliveries, because for a lawmaker, we judge their ability to do well, whether they did well or not, by the ability to fix boreholes, by the ability to pay school fees, by the ability to come to our funerals, by the ability to come to child education, by the ability to attend our social functions, by the ability to take chieftaincy titles, by the ability to fix boreholes. Then we call them this, that, the other. Or I can't call it, we call them projects this, they has fixed this. The primary duty of a lawmaker is almost intangible, because by just altering the constitution of Nigeria, if a lawmaker comes back home and tells people, out of the 4 years I spent in Abuja, I spent the 4 years voting on the amendment to Nigeria's constitution, the people in the village will not understand him, because the last person who went there came and built borehole, paid school fees for 30 people, and then they are clapping for him.
Yeah.
But if he comes back and says he has amended Nigeria, they will not understand it. So for the audience that is listening to us, we have to begin to look at the parameters for judging successful or failed lawmakers. They are successful or they fail, not when they pay primary school fees, not when they buy wire funds for immediate people, not when they save boreholes, not when they attract an asphalt road, which will get wiped out by the time the next week comes.
Very well. Very well.
By tangible governance deliveries through amendments to certain aspects of Nigeria's constitution and other ancillary laws that have impeded our development as a people. That's why I invite the audience that is listening to us to judge our lawmakers based on how far they have affected Nigeria's constitution. If they are state lawmakers, how far they have affected the state laws, how far they have voted. For instance, let me give you one instance. People often talk about the fact that Governor Obiano took Anambra State from 75 billion surplus that was left for him reportedly, and this is a subject of debate, to 109 billion deficit in 2 years. So Obiano plans Anambra State into a debt to the tune of 109 billion. And when we're talking about the high debt profile of Anambra State, everybody's talking about it. But people fail to acknowledge that there are 30 people in the State House Assembly that are
worked with him
for that loan to be obtained. Without that 30 people, Obiano can obtain a loan. So why do you think Obiano for a loan of 109 billion? But you exonerate the 30 people you sent to the State House of Assembly who approved the loan for him. Today, Anambra State debt profile is about to shoot up to 209 billion. The Anambra State of Assembly has approved another borrowing of 100 billion.
All right.
And today we're not talking about them, we're talking about Soludo, but we're not talking about the people who are supporting Soludo. So I invite your audience to talk about the state lawmakers, talk about the federal lawmakers, and judge them by their ability to impact our laws.
Very well. Mr. Chairman, on a very quick note, we would like to engage our audience now in this, but in, say, a minute or two, people have complained about the kleptocracy, found in the local government system. How do we manage this? And now I'm talking about the corruption at the local government levels. In just a minute, how do we manage this purported corruption, alleged corruption in the local government level? Just in a minute, so we can take the calls of our audience.
Corruption exists in all tiers of government. Corruption exists in the federal government, and we have seen reports of snakes swallowing money. We have seen people stealing 80 billion. So corruption exists undeniably at the federal level. Corruption also exists at the state level. We've seen governors, we've seen that of Imo State, we've seen a lot of things happening with the state government. We've seen a lot of former governors jailed or stand trial for one mismanagement or the other. Corruption also exists at local governments. Now, fighting corruption is a different topic on its own. But what I hear from people is that because of corruption, let us shut down the local government system. Okay, then because of corruption, let us also shut down the federal government. Because of corruption, let us also shut down the state government. Let us not have governors again. Let us not have presidents again because they are corrupt. If we have government at the federal, despite the corruption of the federal government. If we have the government at the state level, despite the corruption of the state government, why can't we have local government structure? Let us have them. Let them be corrupt. Then people can begin to, because when the government started in 1999, corruption is always there. But we are beginning to see that there are better management tools, including election transparency, including EFCC and things like that, that is managing the corruption at the federal and the state level. If we have local government autonomy, there will be corruption there initially, but over time, people will begin to develop means to checkmate corruption at the local government. So let this idea of argument of corruption not be the primary argument of people who want to affiliate or who want to strangle out life out of the local government.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, if you're just joining us, we've been on the Grassroots Governance Program on Omega 1.7 FM with Mr. Christian Chima, and he's a political analyst. Maybe when we begin to wrap up, I may want to reintroduce him to the audience. But then, if you want to be a part of this conversation, you can follow us on our Facebook. We are live there. You can follow us on Instagram. You can follow us on Twitter. You can follow us on YouTube and YouTube at Omega 1.7 FM. But practically on Facebook, we are very live there, and you can engage in our discussion on Facebook at Omega 1.7 FM, or call these numbers 0815-1017-777 or 0907-112-1017. Mr. Chairman, please stay on the line while we get to hear from our audience.
That's all right.
Hello. Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, this is Achibarazi from Oji River.
Very well, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, the enemies they have said it all. Because if we have, first of all, if we have a local government election and we elect people that will come to the local government, there will be no corruption. By then, we have local government chairman elected. I myself will go there and ask him what is he doing with our location. Now, why they are not electing local government? Because of God's father. The father in everywhere. Even governor has God's father. If the governor don't have God's father, he will elect people to be in local government and let people to be local government chairman. The only problem is God's father. That's why they are not trying to bring governance in the rural areas. If you have local government chairman and if they give him autonomous on finance, then we, the local people, we ask him what is he doing with our money. No. You see, that's the problem we have. God's father is our problem. Thank you, Atiba.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Atiba. Thank you very much for talking to us. Thank you. That's too many things are happening politically, and particularly at the grassroots. We do hope that things get right. Hello, good morning.
Wonderful and excellent morning to you right in the studio.
Thank you, sir.
Voice of Benedict. Comrade Awokeja, reaching you live here in other local government area of Benedict.
Comrade, good to hear from you once again.
God bless you.
Thank you.
What is jeopardizing the essence of having a stronger grassroots development in Nigeria is the human virus known as corruption. Inability of we, the individual, the citizens, to carry out our judicial activities directly to affect the improvement of grassroots development is another virus. If you work from the rural areas, who will understand that some of us who are civilians doesn't even know our rights. And what are those our rights? Take for instance, let me use Anambra State as a case study. When the governor was campaigning, he made mention of 6 loans from the office. He's going to carry out a comprehensive local government election. But today, what is going on? Have the citizens forgotten their rights? Have they forgotten to know the mandate which the governor campaigned on? The slogan. The citizens of Anambra State, all the 21 local government residents in the 21 local government, should come out to tell the governor, this is not what you told us. Today we are having an appointed, let me call it a loyalist, not even appointed individual. Because if you allow the governor to appoint individuals, maybe people from other party, across party lines appointed. But you will understand that what the people that are occupying those 21 local government positions now as the caretaker committee chairman are party members loyally to the governor, who will only down the tune of the governor. It is not heading to our development. It is not heading to our democracy.
Thank you.
It is not heading for grassroots development as well.
Thank you.
I want to pray.
Thank you, comrade. Sorry we had to let you go. Sorry about that. We also have 2 minutes is given, please. If you are just trying as a matter of fact to conceal, make your listing concise in 2 minutes. Okay, we take this go. Hello, good morning.
Hello.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, and we today.
Very well, we are good.
Happy New Month to you and all Omega fans.
The very best is yours.
I do my humble self, Mr. Margot Man. I'm calling from my hometown.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
My brother, as part of the system, local government system, I must have to tell you that the governors can never allow you to have a financial autonomy, because that is where they get the greater money that they looted during their tenure. And I want to cite one instance now. Do you know that the 27 local government hospitals that were built by Rochas Okorocha, though some completed, others not? Do you know that those hospitals were concessioned by state government? Notwithstanding that the money came from completely from local government accounts. And the whole concession was done without the local government, without concession to local government that owns the money. And as I'm talking to you, those hospitals, the revenue that come from that hospital will go straight to the state. So what are we talking about here? Until we have somebody that believes that Nigeria belongs to all Nigerians, and we have the right to benefit from what God has given us in natural resources, then we can't get it right. Nothing boils down to that corruption of the highest order. You know, your guest, at the analyst there, was on point. In fact, he's rooted to the ground. How can somebody who is in Sokoto be continuing that where I come from? It's ridiculous and it's funny. We follow American system of government, but we don't practice it the way they do. In the US, there's what we call mayoral that county, and they are run by mayors. Even president cannot interfere.
Right,
they don't even have to interfere. Let alone the state government.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. We have to let you go. And on Facebook, we have this one coming from Ozan Naman, watching live from Amagonza in Enugu State. Good morning, Mr. Speaker. For local government system to thrive, it must be granted her full financial autonomy rather than depending largely on states. Thanks and God bless. Ozo Francis Naman from Amagonza. Thank you, Ozo. Thank you for talking to us. And we have this one coming from, it said, KKO. Good morning, Arenze. I support that the LG should be independent from the federal government and the state government so that the local government can function effectively. If this happens, the other 2 tiers of government can mind their businesses and stop being pork nosers. Coming from KKO. Our text message, we have this one coming from Omeli brother. Omeli brother in Aluibo. So, local government and the hijack. The reality is that no greedy man will ever want. The reality is that no greedy man will never want more, and no selfish man will let go a chance to get all things for himself. Until we decide to reject their money in 2023 election and vote for those who have good records, things will surely be worse than now. Open your eyes and open your brains, open your minds, and vote wisely this time. I'm sorry, that's majorly how much we can take on calls and text. Let's get back to our analyst to give us his final words. Mr. Chima.
I believe that Nigeria's morning will come. I have been listening and see the comments of your callers and people presenting their messages. And God, for that reason, to civilian populace not knowing their rights by communal work John, to the third caller saying that jack funds, and I agree with him that jack allocation, that is local government funds, is one of the most mismanaged funds by the state governors. Oftentimes they misappropriate those funds, and when they do projects with those funds, they claim that they did this because we have a political class who does projects with people's money, and they want people to clap for them for doing projects with people's money. So a governor will take local government funds, go to his village. A governor will take funds from Oka North, go to his village in Anambra East or West, and develop all the roads there. And then people are clapping for him. Instead of allowing money that is supposed to be for Agwata to go to Agwata, Nnewi money goes to Nnewi. All local government funds go to, but the governor takes it, misappropriates it, or spends as a green fix with the imprimatur, of course, of the dark committee. So I believe that Nigeria's money will come. And that's why we're doing all we can, using advocacy tools like this one to advocate for an enlightened populace, a populace that knows its civic duties and it is willing to do its civic duties. When Nigerians are alive to their responsibilities, I believe that our government officials, whether they be elected lawmakers or elected governors or presidents, will also do their job. So let's keep discussing. I believe that Nigeria's money.
Thank you, Mr. Chima. Thank you. And once again, you did great justice to this, and I appreciate you big time. This is how much we can take on grassroots governance today. I am Marin Zechuku. As a matter of fact, I implore us to know that as citizens, as the political publics, the right to make and effect this change that we cry for lays with us. The right to effect this change that we yearn for is with us. Ensure that come 2023, your PVCs are at work, rather. Ensure that you go out there to vote. Ensure that you vote wisely. Ensure that you do things to the justification of your conscience. That's how much we can get this thing right. And thank you, Mr. Chema, for speaking with us. Next week, sometime we do this.